Hello, this is Pam. We are live. I'm going to give people a minute to start to join us. This is Pam Bartha, and we are having an amazing discussion on the true cause of multiple sclerosis. And this has been a several-part series. This will be part 4, I believe. Hello, Danielle. So hopefully you guys can hear me. Thumbs up if you can hear me. I'm just going to actually go to my page here because I'd love to engage with you. I'm just going to pull it up for a minute. It should be live now. There we go. Takes a second with this computer or with the internet. There we go. Awesome. So I am going to open this up. Perfect. So welcome. My name is Pam Bartha, and I'm super excited to spend this time with you. I can tell you guys can hear me. Thank you for the love. This has been a really incredibly important series that I've been presenting. We are talking about the true cause of multiple sclerosis. And so I am presenting research to you. And thank you so much. I love all the interaction. Thank you for the hearts and the thumbs up. So I'm presenting a lot of research, and I just have some more research to share with you next Wednesday that I just came across this last week. I spend all my spare time researching because this is a topic that I'm extremely passionate about. For those of you that have not met me before, my name is Pam Bartha. I am the author of Become a Wellness Champion and founder of Live Disease Free. And 28 years ago, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I thought I was a really healthy person, and I couldn't understand how you could go from being healthy, eating healthy, slim, active, and then all of a sudden, within 2 weeks, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I lost all vision in my left eye, complete blackout. Then I had weakness and tingling in my legs. My mother had to step in to help me. I had 2 small children. I was devastated because when I went to the experts, this was 28 years ago, the neurologist, and this was at a university MS clinic, hospital clinic, he told me that there was nothing that I could do, that I had multiple sclerosis, I would be completely disabled in time, and they didn't know what caused it, and there was no cure. I left his office devastated, and I thought that my life was over. And the sad reality is that 28 years later, we really don't know much more about multiple sclerosis. I've been spending some extra time looking at different videos of the standard of care approach and understanding where they're at right now. And what they're saying at this time, which is very similar to 28 years ago, they're saying, well, we don't know what causes MS. It looks like the immune system is involved for sure. Well, we knew that 28 years ago because that's why they were giving me prednisone, was to shut down the immune system from overreacting when I was dealing with the optic neuritis. So we knew that years and years ago. And then also they're thinking, well, there's other environmental factors, possibly viruses, and we're going to talk about viruses today, but they're saying, you know, there is possibly a genetic component to it also. But there again, that is so weak. And they're saying, well, actually, we can't really say that it's genetic because in most families, there are not a lot of links. So we're going to talk about all those things today. But we're really going to be focusing on viruses today. So if you missed the first few sessions of the series, the parts of the series, probably about 3 weeks ago, I did part 1, which is I talked about and I discussed multiple sclerosis and parasitic infections. And that was groundbreaking information. Like it just, I believe Dr. McDonald came up with it about a year ago. And I found his YouTube lecture that he published about 6 months ago or a few months more than that. If you haven't watched it, you have to watch also my Facebook Live, but also his research. He is finding nematodes, which are small little worms in the central nervous system of every single patient that had passed away from multiple sclerosis, in their spinal fluid especially, but also in their brains, but mostly in their spinal fluid because the worms like to swim around. So they don't like to hang out in the brain. They cause damage in the brain and then they move around into the central nervous system. So that was 3 weeks ago. You can just look up multiple sclerosis and parasites or parasitic infections and you'll find it. It is on YouTube also, and it is on Facebook Live. The next week we looked at or talked about fungal infections and multiple sclerosis. This is something that I've known about for years because some of the very amazing hero doctors from 30 years ago. They knew this, and I read their books and I started to lower the fungal overgrowth in my body. Plus, I was also lowering other infections, which I didn't know at the time. But all in all, through treating infection, I've lived MS-free for the past 28 years. And it's not that I just cured myself of disease 28 years ago and then I just went back to my old life. No, I have continued to live what I preach, what I practice, what I teach for the past 28 years. And I continue to learn and learn. So that was the second part, was talking about multiple sclerosis and fungal infections. It is a very big part of multiple sclerosis in my experience personally, and I have worked with hundreds of people, and it is a very big infection that people that have multiple sclerosis suffer with. Then the third part of the series, I talked about multiple sclerosis and Lyme disease. And Lyme disease, we're talking about Borrelia, but not just Borrelia, but a lot of co-infections that travel with these. They're called vector-borne infections. These infections we get from any type of an insect that is a biting insect. So it can be mosquitoes, it can be ticks, horseflies, fleas on your cat. Yes, absolutely. So there's many different, and actually we found out now that these nematodes can also, these little worms can also carry Borrelia into our central nervous system. So I hope that you're starting to see that we're painting this picture, and I'm going to wrap it all together when we finish all these series of helping you to make sense, like, oh my gosh, Pam, if we're dealing with parasites and viruses and fungus and different bacterial infections, like how do we know how to treat all these things and how do we recover? Well, I want you to understand that that is why there will never be a single cure for multiple sclerosis. There's never going to be a one pill does it all for us, because all the students that I work with, they're dealing with different types of infections, and some will have more fungus, some will have more Lyme, some will have blazing parasites. And so everybody is a little bit different, but we use the same general principles and we have to treat. And as we knock those infections back, then we get our life back. And that is the cool thing. And there's many wellness champions that have done that. And there are many more wellness champions on their way that are probably listening right now. And if you guys have questions, please type them in the question box. So I would really like you to please share this with other people. There are people in your life that you know that are searching for answers. And this is not just for MS. This is for all chronic disease. Infections, chronic infections, the toxicity of these infections is involved in all chronic disease. So please share, please like, please help us get the word out. The more we discuss this, the more this information reaches our healthcare professionals, then they start to question, like, there's so many people getting better. And it's like, how are they doing that? That's impossible. And then they start to see this research that they're not exposed to. When I shared the information about Lyme disease, it really made me sad when I was doing the research, and I found that way back in 1911, we already had studies coming out showing that there were spirochetes, which are these corkscrew type bacteria, which would be Borrelia. They were found in the spinal fluid of MS patients dating back to 1911. And I have this beautiful resource that we have posted in the feed below this Facebook Live that is called Evidence That Multiple Sclerosis is an Infectious Disease. Please share that with everyone that you know. It is so important to get that out and to share it, because, especially with our healthcare professionals, because they don't learn this in school, in their education. They don't learn this. Our medically trained doctors, I love them. They saved my son's life when he was born premature. They stabilize us when we're in a crisis situation. But they're really trained in medicine, and they are not exposed to this research. So we've got to get it out to them, all right? It's really important. So I'm just going to say hello to a few people before I get started with viruses and multiple sclerosis. So hello, Angie, and I hope I pronounced your name right. Is it Kia, hopefully? And Deba, and Patricia, and Alice, and Aram, Margaret, Cherith, Sharon, Norris, and Karen, and Deb, Patricia, hello Ken, and Lori, and Elizabeth, and Dottie, and Stephanie, and Mary. There's a lot of you, so I'm gonna probably stop. And Jose, hello, out in Ecuador. So there's people from all over the world on this Facebook Live. And it is a huge honor and a privilege for me to share the research and my understanding of multiple sclerosis and viruses. So there are many different types of microbes that are involved with MS. We know that. When it comes to viruses, this is where I'm going to share some things with you that are really going to help you to understand, and I really hope that it helps some integrative healthcare professionals to understand the role of viruses in multiple sclerosis. So there is a lot of research out there and going on currently where they really are looking at Epstein-Barr virus and multiple sclerosis. Epstein-Barr virus is that virus that some of us got when we were teenagers. It's like mononucleosis. Epstein-Barr virus tests positive in about 92% of the population. That's really important to know. So in the vast majority of people that don't have MS, so in all of the population, up to 92% of the people test positive for Epstein-Barr virus. So it's a very common virus that's present in all of us. It is part of the herpes family. And the key is that the theory is that they're saying, well, maybe it is some genetic link, like maybe we have a genetic predisposition for multiple sclerosis. And maybe there's another environmental factor. Maybe we're deficient in vitamin D. So maybe because of genetics and because of vitamin D, then all of a sudden, this Epstein-Barr virus starts to get out of control and becomes more active. And maybe it's a combination of all three things that gives us multiple sclerosis. All right, so that's the theory. Then there are a couple of other viruses that are commonly researched now or recently with respect to multiple sclerosis, and that would be the human herpes virus 6, so HHVS, and also the other one is, I'm just going to call it retroviruses because you guys don't need all the big scientific names. And retroviruses are interesting because researchers are telling us that in our genetic material, they're finding these sequences of DNA from viruses. And so they've somehow kind of inserted little bits of genetic material in our genetic material. And so they're thinking, well, maybe there's a combination or an interplay between retroviruses and human herpes 6 and or Epstein-Barr viruses. But with all of this, in all of the research that I've looked at, and I've put a bunch of current research below for you, that there's a lot of possible and might. It's very, very, to me, it's like grasping at straws. There's not a huge link. So the things that I have a problem, and let me backtrack for a minute, is that could viruses impact multiple sclerosis? Absolutely. I totally believe they could, but for a different reason, and I'll explain it. So before we talk about this, we have to understand that our central nervous system is not sterile. So our brain and our spinal fluid, just in the last few years, they've realized and discovered that there is this whole ecosystem of microbes living in our central nervous system. All right, so that's the first key that we have to know. So there will be different types of viruses present and bacteria, etc., in our central nervous system. It is not sterile like we thought it was. So there will be other viruses, not just these three that I mentioned. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that if viruses are the main cause, let's even say Epstein-Barr, because there's a lot of research looking at the Epstein-Barr virus because they feel, well, in the general population, there are about 92% of the general population test positive for Epstein-Barr, but when you look at MS, it's 100%, almost 100% of people that have multiple sclerosis test positive for Epstein-Barr. So they're like, well, that 7% difference, that might really mean something. It could, but it could also just be that when we have multiple sclerosis and we have a lot of infections, other infections, our immune system is really compromised. And if they are really making us sick and weak, then yes, we could get all kinds of other viruses active. We could have more flus. We could have all kinds of different viruses. So that's the first thing, is that if the Epstein-Barr virus is truly the cause or a big factor in multiple sclerosis, then wouldn't we see more people having multiple sclerosis if 92% of the population, up to 92% of the population has Epstein-Barr? Shouldn't we see more multiple sclerosis in the general population? So that's the first thing to consider. Also, the research shows that, and I'm going to read this to you for a second, the paradox between high infection prevalence. So there's a paradox, they're saying, because there's this high infection of the Epstein-Barr virus prevalence and low MS incidence. It remains elusive. So they just don't understand. They're like saying, well, there's a really high prevalence of Epstein-Barr in the population, up to 92%. And they're saying as far as the MS infection in the general population, it's very low incidence. So they're saying that's a paradox. They're also saying in another study they shared, given the very high frequency of Epstein-Barr virus in multiple sclerosis, we said almost up to 100% are testing positive. There's finding that the frequency of spinal fluid produced antibodies to Epstein-Barr virus in patients with multiple sclerosis is paradoxically low. So they're saying, you know, if all these patients with MS are testing high for like 100% for Epstein-Barr, they're looking in the spinal fluid and they're finding that the antibodies against that virus are very low. And they're lower than other common viruses. So if truly the Epstein-Barr was causing a problem, we should find higher antibodies in our central nervous system, shouldn't we? So they're saying, no, we're actually finding lower antibody counts for the Epstein-Barr, and we're finding higher antibody counts for other viruses. Okay, so that is just talking about the Epstein-Barr. So it's pretty weak. It's a pretty weak connection to me, all right, in my humble opinion. The second thing is genetics. So when we talk about where we're at today with standard of care, they're saying that, well, there could be a possible genetic component to multiple sclerosis. And yes, there possibly could, but when we really look at genetics, we know now that there is this whole field of study, and it's called epigenetics, which means that the genes that you inherit at birth are not necessarily expressed the way that they are due to all the environmental factors that are involved. So what we eat, the microbes that live inside of us, there are hundreds of different factors that turn genes on and off. So to just say that there's a genetic predisposition to MS is a big stretch, because they have not found that in research. Like, I challenge you to share that with me, because that has not been discovered and it has not been proven in research. And they actually say, the researchers say, that the majority of people diagnosed with multiple sclerosis do not have family members or relatives that have multiple sclerosis. All right, so the genetic link is pretty weak. Environment plays a much bigger part. Then let's talk about the low vitamin D. I have interviewed hundreds of people that suffer with multiple sclerosis. I would say at least 700 by now. And I can tell you that pretty much 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 people are on vitamin D supplements, because we're told as soon as we're having MS, they're like, you've got to get on a vitamin D supplement. And these people that are all taking vitamin D supplements, some of them taking very high doses, they all are suffering with multiple sclerosis. So that's one thing that I have a problem with. The next thing is that if you have a family and one person comes down with MS, right? And if we're saying it's a vitamin D deficiency, don't you think that we would see it more commonly in families? That, you know, if you're in a family that you probably have the same amount of sunshine, you probably are eating the same types of foods, wouldn't we see a higher incidence of MS if vitamin D was the issue? I personally think we would. So that's another issue that I have. And then another one is that there are these amazing hero doctors. One of them, Dr. Klinghardt, who I admire so much. He's helped so many people recover from chronic disease. And he finds and he shares that people that have infections have lower amounts of vitamin D. So there are certain infections, just like, remember, I've been talking about in our series about how certain microbes, they are parasitic. They are freeloaders. They are robbing nutrients from us. There are some microbes that love vitamin D. So for example, Lyme disease. And these hero doctors that know this, they will actually give patients more vitamin D to bait these microbes out of the tissue so they come out of their hiding places so that they can treat them with therapies better. So is it that people with multiple sclerosis are deficient in vitamin D and that causes the MS? Or is it that infections, that some of which thrive on vitamin D and they make us deficient in vitamin D? Is that why we have some correlation between vitamin D deficiency and multiple sclerosis? And that would make more sense then, because maybe some of the other family members don't have those infections. And if they don't have those infections, they're not going to be deficient, right? So that makes a lot more sense to me. All right, so going on to the next thing, so viruses. Now we're going to talk more about viruses and why I don't believe that they are the biggest culprit. They can make us feel more lousy, absolutely, right? Especially if we have the flu or even if we had mono, absolutely. But the first thing you have to understand is that viruses are not living. They're not like a bacteria, they're not like a parasite. They do not eat food. They don't need food for energy. They're this weird thing. I learned this years and years ago back in university. They are a protein coat. So it's a coat with genetic material inside. And I have no idea how they operate, but that's what we're taught in science, is that viruses are it's a protein coat with DNA genetic material, and they literally attach to your cell, and they inject their genetic material into your cell, and they hijack your cell and cause your cell to make more DNA particles. They're called particles. So they're not living. That's a really big factor, is to know that. Because when I work with students, and I've noticed this for myself too, is that when you follow the right eating plan, the eating plan that's part of our Live Disease-Free Academy, which is a nutritional ketogenic eating plan, it's very, very low in carbohydrates, very nutritional, lots of vegetables, lots of nutrients, healthy fats, adequate protein, but we're going low, low, low carb. We notice shifts in our health within a matter of days. It can be less than a week. It can be like 2 or 3 days. People start to see differences, like significant differences in their health. So if viruses are the biggest cause, if they're causing the biggest problem for us that are dealing with multiple sclerosis, and they're not living and they don't need food, why would we see such a shift in health? That's a very big, big thing that you need to contemplate, all right? Bacteria and parasites and fungi, they all thrive on carbohydrates. So they will thrive. So that's why they may be a secondary problem, but viruses, I don't believe, are the primary problem, all right? Because yes, over time, if we ate a bunch of junk food, we would be more weak and we'd have poor health and we'd be more susceptible to viral infections, absolutely. But to see changes within a matter of 2 or 3 days, a week or 2 weeks, where people are noticing, even within 2 weeks, people that were following paleo, that were eating pretty healthy, but they just make these fine adjustments and they decrease their carbs low enough and they're following it properly, and they notice that they can walk better. They notice that their bladder settles down, that a lot of symptoms, their foggy head goes away, that they feel so much better in the matter of a week to 2 weeks, and energy coming back. So that is a big thing that tells me that viruses are not the main culprit. Make sure that you share this information with other people. It's so important, because this is the whole key, is that when we truly understand what the cause is, then we are going to pick therapies and treatments, and we're going to pick a path that actually gets us to the root cause and treats it and helps us to get better. And that is my goal for you, is first of all, we have to get that mindset of understanding what's causing the multiple sclerosis. All right, so the first factor is they're non-living, and there wouldn't be any difference with the eating plan, all right, if it was solely viruses. The next thing is that let me just see, I think that's it. Yes, I think I've answered all of it. Okay, so why are we holding on to this theory of viruses? Why are we holding on to it with all of the millions of dollars of research that are going on? I'm going to leave that question for another day. I don't want to get into that because that's there's a little bit of things involved with that. But what I did want to share, though, is that if they're right? And if they're saying that viruses are a really big factor and they've got to produce vaccines, right, for us, and they also have to, create these drugs that suppress our immune system and wipe out our B cells or trap our lymphocytes because of these viruses, then we have to ask the next question and say, well, if viruses are a big problem, right, causing multiple sclerosis, then when we're taking these disease-modifying drugs, and I'm not going to name any names, but there are many of them that are very immune suppressive drugs. And if they're suppressing our immune system and we are dealing with viruses, that doesn't make sense. That's not going to help us, is it? Right? With multiple sclerosis, I hope that you understand is that you have to become the director of your health. You have to use common sense. You have to understand what it takes to be healthy. It's vital because that is your most important role. And because I did that early on in my walk with multiple sclerosis, that is why I've been able to live 28 years free of MS. So then what I would really like you to do is that if you are on these disease-modifying drugs, I would really like you just to start to research them and to understand how they're working in your body and to understand what they're doing and what the adverse effects are. Because many of them are suppressing our immune system. And if we have all of these infections that I've been talking about, does it make sense to suppress your immune system when you're dealing with infection? Or does it make more sense to treat the infections, right? And that's where you get the greatest quality of life. So I'm going to go to your questions right now. Hopefully you guys have some good questions for me. So Judith, what should somebody be eating and not eating? So with respect to the eating plan, what I have found that is the most helpful is really lowering the carbs. So my students and myself go off of all grains. And remember, I tried to share this with my students the other day. I'm just think about these little nematodes swimming around in your central nervous system, right? Or fungus or Lyme, etc. And Lyme is this little corkscrew bacteria that shoots around. It's got these little tails called flagellum or flagella. And think about them, and they love carbohydrates. Most of them, that's their primary fuel. So when we're binging on carbs, it's feeding them. So the key is that we want to feed our body, but not feed those infections. We still have to treat them, but we have to greatly reduce the food to them before we can even begin to think about treating them. So that means 9 to 13 servings of vegetables a day. For those of you that have chronic inflammatory bowel, you cannot handle 9 to 13. So you got to listen to your body. So with everything that I share, it's always for educational purposes. It's not intended to replace the necessary measures of your doctor, but that's why it's just to give you information so that you can start to take back your life. So the eating plan is lots of low carb vegetables. So we bring in lots of nutrition into our body. We bring in lots of fiber because our good microbes that we're trying to build up, they love the fiber. We have moderate amounts of animal protein, just because I find the vegetarian diet is really hard to get well when you are loaded with these infections that love carbohydrates. That's the problem. It's not that the vegetarian diet is bad. It's just that when your body is overwhelmed with infection, I've tried working with people that are vegetarian, but it is very, very difficult. It's painful, and I don't like that for my students. So please, if you could accept, if it's ethical, just get some good quality, even if it's eggs and some fish, some chicken, whatever. But when you decrease the carbs so low and you're taking out all the grains and you're taking out all the beans, etc., it's really hard to get enough calories and enough nutrition, especially complete protein. So a moderate amount of protein, not high amounts, just enough to keep your muscle mass. So yes, a young man who's working will need more protein than somebody who is very inactive, right? So that's the first step, is good quality animal protein, moderate amounts, huge amounts of vegetables, enough healthy fat to keep your weight on, and then a little bit of nuts and seeds. Eating too many nuts and seeds or nut butters, that gives people too many carbs and it makes them feel lousy. That's a really big area where people mess up. And then a tiny bit of fruit. Some people exclude the fruit for a while. You can have fresh lemon juice, fresh lime juice is fine. But it's a little tiny small serving of low sugar fruit first thing in the morning, 30 minutes before breakfast, so that you digest it well and it does not ferment. Or you can skip it until you've treated the infection. So that type of an eating plan, what you'll notice is if you follow it properly, you'll notice that the microbes that are making you sick, many of them are going to be less active. You're going to have less inflammation. It's still there, but it's going to be more quiet. And you're going to start to see symptom improvement. And that's a huge deal because then people go, oh my gosh, it's working, it's working. And then you have to move on to the other steps. And there's a lot of other steps. The first step is to treat the eating plan. The second step is we have to support the body. We have to make sure that you are eliminating toxins, opening up detox pathways, correcting nutritional deficiencies, cleaning up the environment. There's a number of things to support your body before you start to do the killing. The killing phase, it's not like the good old days where you go to the doctor, you have strep throat, let's say, and you just get an antibiotic and you're cured in a week or two. This is a whole different thing. This is where your immune system is overwhelmed. You have microbes in your central nervous system. You have microbes in your sinuses, in your different parts of your body, all over, especially the GI tract. That's where most of these are. And so the key is that in order to get better, you first stop feeding those infections so much. Secondly, you support your body with a whole bunch of steps. Thirdly, you figure out which bugs are bugging you the most. This is hard because we don't have a lot of good tests. That's because we haven't been going down this road. So the key is that we look at health history. We look at symptoms because there are specific symptoms for parasites. There are specific symptoms for fungal overgrowth, for viruses, for different bacterial infections, the Lyme disease, very specific ones. So that's how I help my students is that they go through all these checklists and they go, oh my gosh, I had no idea that I had Borrelia, but if I've got 80% of the symptoms that are here, I probably need to look at that. So then when we're going to the killing part, it's like peeling layers off an onion, right? And we start with the bugs that are bugging us the most, and very often it's the bigger bugs or fungal overgrowth, but it's very involved. But people, when you have the steps laid out for you, and that's what I help people do, is I help them with a plan, holding them by hand, walking them through the plan, and that's how people can recover so much quicker. So I'm going to go and see what other questions you have here. So do you test negative for MS now? The cool thing is that when your symptoms stop, and I've had this with a lot of students, when your symptoms stop and you go for your MRI exam, even if those lesions are still there and you have been off your medications for a year or two and there's been no difference in activity and you have no symptoms and you've passed all your tests, all the different testing they're doing, they say you don't have to bother coming back. I've had that with a number of my students. So that's the key, is that if I went back to my old ways and infections flared up, I could totally get MS back now. Anyone could, for sure, because we don't have a solid way to sterilize our body. But what we do is we knock them back far enough so that we are symptom-free and we can live our life. And you have to know that by the time we get up there, 80, 90 years old, it is infection that takes us out. All the people that are dealing with all of these different diseases, whether it's diabetes, multiple sclerosis, ALS, Parkinson's, all the poor people that are in the extended care homes, they are loaded with infection. So what you have to do is you have to learn how to turn that and get the bad microbes down, get the good microbes up. And if you get good at that skill, you can live many, many years disease-free. Okay, they're moving quickly here. All right, I'll go through a few questions. We have a few minutes here. Hello, hello, hello to many people just looking for questions. You are so very welcome. I'm so happy that you are so blessed by this information. So Mickey, you've been tested positive for Lyme's and a lot of different things, also depleted hormones, low D. This makes common sense. caution with the hormones. This is one thing that I really want you to be cautionary about, any of you, is that when we have these infections, they produce chemicals that are kind of like estrogen or different hormonal type chemicals. So it can really throw our hormones out of whack. And a lot of these doctors don't understand this. So what they'll do is they'll prescribe even bioidentical hormones. And that is the worst thing you can do, is to go on any hormones, in my humble opinion. Because when we take hormones, it changes our body chemistry in ways that we just don't understand. So it can actually, like even taking bioidentical or synthetic hormones, two ways it can change it. It can suppress our inflammatory immune response. So the fighting mechanism of our immune system is more quiet and we feel better, right? But when you have a war going on and you harness the good guys, then the bad guys just keep moving in and taking over more. So people that are on hormones, in a few years, they find they have more disease symptoms, different types of disease symptoms, because different bugs move in. It's a disaster. So when you treat the infections and you give your body a lot of nutrition, your body is genetically programmed. It knows how to operate and it will balance itself out with the hormones. So please be careful with that. And high doses of vitamin D. Does it make sense to take thousands and thousands of international units of vitamin D? If they are feeding those bad microbes, they love it, and it's actually fairly toxic at a very high level. And it's not treating the cause, right? That's the key. It's not treating the cause. So why not treat the cause? Sure, if you live where I do, where it's cloudy all winter, then yes, take a little bit of vitamin D if you can't get enough sunshine. I can't get sunshine. There's no way around it. We have weeks and weeks with cloud cover. So then I take, 4,000 units or 5,000 international units. I don't take, tens of thousands of international units. I don't believe in high doses of different vitamins, especially if they're synthetic. Vitamin D3 is not synthetic, but especially the other ones. I'm so glad, Mickey, that it makes sense to you. Hello from New York. You had Epstein-Barr as a child, Annette, and most of us have. So remember that people, 92% of the population, of the general population, have had Epstein-Barr. So I honestly don't feel that it is, I think that it's getting a lot of attention by well-meaning researchers. They really mean well and they're really trying to find an answer, but it's just because it's present in 100% of the MS patients, but it's present in 92% of the general population. So there's not much difference. There's only 7% difference. And I really believe that little difference is just caused by the fact that when you're loaded with a lot of infections and your immune system is suppressed, then yes, we're going to be more susceptible to all kinds of other infections. Hello, Rob, and looking for questions here. So Mike, you have MS and you're willing to try anything? Yes, I can help you, absolutely. I have this amazing training. It's 2 hours, but I promise you, you'll love it because I talk about infection. So many of you have never heard this before. You've heard of viruses, but you've never heard of parasitic infections. You've never heard of fungal infections. Some of you, more of you, are hearing about the Borrelia and the Lyme infections. But my masterclass training, it goes through explaining the infections and how they make us sick with MS. I give you a ton of case studies of people that have recovered, miracles, and they're not miracles, it's just that the body was supported in the way that it should be. And then I give you the steps. I talk about the steps in a general sense of all the big steps that we need to take to recover. And then if you're at the place where you want help, if you want a plan, if you want step-by-step plan, then I can help you with that too. So make sure that you'll notice that in this feed, there will be a link to my masterclass training. And that is a masterclass training that has given many people their life back. All right. And many people are on their journey working towards, but at least they know it's infection. And so they've had a lot of improvement and they're working to finish the job. All right. So going on to Becky, is colloidal silver, I would imagine. It's a killing agent. Can that pass through the blood-brain barrier? And that would that be a good tool for killing infections? And coconut nut milk. So the thing with colloidal silver is, yes, it is one of the therapies that do kill infection. But we always, when we look at all of the different treatments for killing infection, we always look at benefit versus risk. And colloidal silver is safe. It's been used for many, many, many years for disinfecting water, and before they had antibiotics, they used it. But the problem I have with it is that if you use it on a regular basis, that if you don't have the right kind of colloidal silver, and even if you have the right kind but you have too much of it, your skin can turn this kind of a blue-gray color, and that is not cool, and you can't get rid of it. So that's why I personally, it's a condition, and I don't believe it's a toxic condition, but I personally don't want to take a risk, and I'm always really anal about making sure that the types of therapies we use are as safe as possible. So I personally would only use colloidal silver for a very short time, for maybe if somebody was dealing with a flu or a cold or like some kind of a mouth infection or something like that. But personally, I wouldn't use colloidal silver ongoing. And I don't know if it is going to be strong enough, and I don't believe that it will go interstitial. We have to use different types of therapy. So when people are treating infections, like a lot of these microbes, they move deep into our tissue, they move into our lymphocytes, into our white blood cells, our lymphatic system, into our central nervous system. So we use different things to bait them out, to chase them out, to bait them out, and then certain therapies can be liposomal, which will help to go deeper into our tissue. So this is why it really requires strategy, and you have to work with somebody, whether it's with us or someone else. You've got to work with somebody that has skill. Just taking colloidal silver is not going to do it on its own, especially probably with the dose you're taking. And then I really would not want you to turn blue because it's not attractive. So there are many, many different types of essential oils and oxygen therapies and herbs, etc., that are helpful. But there again, you have to have a strategic plan. And sometimes we layer things. We use herbs, there's essential oils, we use oxygen therapies, and there's electromagnetic, pulsed electromagnetic therapy, there is light therapy, there is probiotic therapy, there's enzyme therapy, there's so many different things, but to put it together in a meaningful way to really make a difference with killing the infections that's the challenge, and you have to work with somebody that has experience with that. And also, the key is you have to understand what is the best route, because it's so much more cost effective, because you can make sure that you're only doing things that are necessary. That is a huge thing. So, and then a coconut milk is not going to be enough also. And then going to Barb, you are using some of the, I'm guessing it's virus. How soon after a virus does MS start? You had a virus at Easter 2003 and your MS symptoms started later. What I believe is that there are so many triggers that cause MS, and viruses, yes, but basically it's like if you're living with an overload of infection for years, and let's say it's fungal overgrowth, let's say it's parasitic and different bacteria like Lyme, etc., and they're growing and growing and they're becoming more active, then there are triggers, and it could be high stress. So sometimes it's a death in the family for some people. For some people, it's maybe they've been on antibiotics because maybe they had a urinary tract infection, or they had some other type of infection, maybe a bronchial infection. Maybe they had a viral infection. But there is something, it's kind of like the trigger that breaks the camel's back. It's like you're already you're carrying this load of infection with you, right, through life, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you don't know it. I didn't know it either. I just thought, I'm just chronically fatigued. I've got 2 small kids, that's normal. But the key is that you were already in the state of carrying this huge load of infection, and then you get the viral infection, and it's like, okay, now your immune system has just it's too weak, right? So it's not necessarily the viral infection. It's not the death in the family. It's not the loss of the job. It's not the, crisis in the relationship. It's not the antibiotic, the one thing that caused the MS, but it's kind of the last factor that throws us into an attack. And then we see when we have multiple sclerosis, if we don't treat the infections, we see that every time all these things, maybe we're not sleeping, maybe we have insomnia, that'll make the infections grow quicker. Maybe we get that viral infection, maybe we have a bladder infection, maybe we have stress in our family, we have stress with our kids, there's stress, we're living in a time with huge stress, right? So stress will also So that is what makes, and then if we're eating a lot of processed carbs, if we're feeding those infections, they're gonna grow a lot faster too. So it's not necessarily just that a virus causes the MS, is that the virus was just one of the straws on your back that broke the camel's back and brought us into a state of an attack, of an MS attack. All right, so just a couple of last little points here because we've gone on. So how to know what type of viruses and bacteria are running in the body. So you're working with us, Aaron, so you are definitely not going to have a problem with that, because it's going to be through all of the assessment forms that you're going to be able to help your daughter to figure out which bugs are bugging her the most and which ones she needs to treat, you guys need to treat. So Mike, make sure to reach out to us. There is the link of my masterclass training. It's important, you have to watch the masterclass training first, right? Because that gives you all of the background information so that you and I can have an intelligent conversation about infections. Thank you for all the hearts and thumbs up. And then the second thing is that you're gonna get an opportunity to book a strategy session with me. And then you have to do a little pre-work before, and then we can chat and I can figure out how best to support you. But yes, you definitely can get on the track to beating these infections. All right, so what do I suggest for an MS person, Lori? So I did explain a lot of that. Please listen to my free masterclass training. You will love it. There is a ton of information. There are a ton of case studies. That you're so welcome, Angie. Hello, Rhonda. You would love to learn more about the program. Yeah, please just listen to my free training and you'll be able to find out information about that. And you can literally start immediately. I have people joining every week and it is super exciting. All right, so I'm gonna let you guys go. There are a few more questions, but I have been on for 47 minutes here, so I'm gonna let you guys go. So with that, please share this information. If you're listening to the replay, please type in your questions below because we will answer your questions. Listen to my masterclass training. You don't have to live with multiple sclerosis. But you have to do the right thing. You've got to treat infection. Yes, eating is so important. The eating plan is important, but you will never recover. Even the eating plan we follow, you're not going to recover because, or even the eating plan we follow, it does not kill the infections. There's still enough natural carbohydrates and sugars, even in our low carb diet, to keep those critters alive. And so we need to knock them back so far that we can handle life, we can handle the ups and downs of life, and it doesn't throw us into, another attack. So listen to the masterclass training, get started, start recovering, share this with other people, share the evidence, my document, evidence that multiple sclerosis is an infectious disease. Share that with everyone, share that with your doctors, because we need change, right? Enough is enough. It's been 30 years since I was diagnosed with MS, and like I said, nothing has changed. You guys are the trailblazers. You guys are the wellness champions. You guys are going to help us bring change. So with that, Wednesday, next week, I'll be here again, and I'm going to be talking more about the new research about these parasitic nematodes found in 10 out of the 10 brains and spinal fluid of patients with multiple sclerosis that had died from MS. These are nematodes that are little worms. And I'm going to be showing you the research of all the symptoms that animals that come down with these parasitic nematode infections in their central nervous system, how similar that is to MS symptoms. It's frightening, actually. So 5 o'clock, Wednesday next week. I'll see you then. Take care and bye-bye for now.